So we're going to get started just momentarily. If anyone wants to move up, they can, or however you want. I know sometimes you might want to space yourself around the room. That's okay as well. Bruce Corse is going to officially welcome you and our presenters.
Lashana Tova again, everyone, and welcome to Reflections. This is one of my favorite things on Yom Kippur because it's a little more personal, it's a little more casual, and it's, no offense to the rabbi, it's a little more interesting. No, not his sermons. I'm talking about the service in general. That's all. It's just this is a talk. This is what? Oh, the music's wonderful. Wonderful. The music's always great. And the sermons are wonderful too.
He was trying to say a compliment.
By the way, though, did you notice that we wrapped things up today with awe? I mean, we went from awe-inspiring in your first sermon and wrapped up today with awesome, and we just kept going all the way through. But anyway, so Reflections is a much more casual thing, and it's people talking about their own experiences, but it's also talking about things that affect all of us as well. And so this year we decided we would go with science, because science is really topical right now, and there's a lot of good things happening, there's a lot of not so good things happening, and all of which impacts us and our world. So we have three people today. We have Joe Morris, who is really is a rocket scientist, but he's not talking about space today. Joe is going to be talking about his journey through science and Judaism. We've got Shara Gabriel, who is a psychologist and is going to be talking, by the way, am I referring you to Shara Gabriel or should I be Shara Kleiman?
Yeah, it's confusing. I use Gabriel professionally,
Okay. All right.
But my real name is Kleiman.
We know her and love her as Shara Kleiman,
Yeah.
but professionally she's Shara Gabriel, and her experience is in psychology. And then Alan Friedman is going to talk. He is our astronomer. So we're covering all the bases today, and it should be just a fascinating hour, and we're looking forward to it. So we'll start with Joe. And do you want to stand at the lectern? Do you want to sit? Okay, and then anyone else, the lectern is maybe your best bet. You've got the platform here, so you have some height. And then enjoy. And then what we'll do is we'll have them talk first, and then if we've got some time at the end, we'll throw it open for questions. Enjoy. And I'm loosening my tie.
Lashana Tova, everybody. Rabbi Alex asked me to do a reflections on science and religion, and that was it. So you left the rest up to me, so bear with me on this one. I'm sure most of you now know who I am since I gave that little thing this morning, but I'm Joe Morris, and I write the environmental column in the High Notes every month. I've also organized some Earth Day events here. But in those columns, I often express my beliefs about religions and science and how they interplay. You may have also seen the write-up in the Federation Weekly email about me, which gave some hints of my life and my feelings about religion and science. I see today as an opportunity to condense those thoughts into something cognizant that might serve as a springboard for a discussion. So if you heard what I'm about to say, please forgive me. Perhaps understanding my journey may help you with yours. Science and later engineering have been the focus of my life. I grew up in the 50s and the 60s, which were heady times for science. You know, you had Mercury, you had Apollo, you had all those space things that were going on. And for me, it started with Sputnik. I was barely old enough to understand what it was, but for some reason, it struck a deep chord within me. And then in third grade, our teachers used to read to us with a head on the desk after lunch, because in those days, you couldn't do anything after you ate because you were liable to, I don't know what. But included in those readings were 3 books about Tom Swift, who was an 18-year-old inventor of nuclear-powered aircraft, jet-propelled submarines, and the first rocket to orbit the Earth. From then on, I knew I was going to be Tom Swift and became an engineer and wanted to become an engineer and an astronaut. But I found myself often fighting with teachers who told me I was spending too much time reading science and science fiction, and that I was too young to know what I really wanted. Well, you tell that to a 12-year-old, and what are they going to do? Ignore you, ignore them. So that's what I did. I ignored them, and I continued on. I went to an academic high school that was specialized in pre-engineering, Brooklyn Tech, where I actually formed a little rocket club in my freshman year. If any of you have seen October Sky, they were a lot more successful than I was. But I still cry now when I see October Sky for what I might have done. So next, I went to NYU School of Engineering, where I see the BS in physics and the BE in mechanical engineering. While I was there, I tried to get into the Air Force ROTC because I wanted to be an astronaut, and I thought that was the best way of doing it. But they turned me down because of my eyes. However, I did have a 40-year career in the aerospace industry, where I worked on rockets for missile defense, ejection seats, launch boosters, and satellite propulsion. And so science was the focus of my life. Why religion? Well, my father belonged to an Orthodox temple, though he wasn't Orthodox, where I received my religious training. After my bar mitzvah, I had a fallout with my religious school teacher about tefillin. He wanted me to demonstrate it after I came back from my bar mitzvah. I had never practiced it, and I had no intention of wearing it, so he threw me out of the class and told me not to come back until I was ready to do tefillin. Well, I never went back. At that time, I was struggling with how to reconcile religion with my love and dedication to science. Also, right about then, the microwave remnants of the Big Bang were discovered. This was 1964. So, science was right. There was a Big Bang. And that settled it. Science won. For the next 50 years or so, I believed that science had all the answers. However, I sent my kids to religious school to let them make their own decisions about science, about religion, I mean. But I was active in the synagogue, as a good parent should be. As I grew older, there were lingering doubts about science and religion that I couldn't shake. And I always had questioned where God came from. And that's what led me to science, because we had Big Bang and had all the answers. But then I kept thinking about what was before Big Bang. And in 2016, I watched a television documentary on some of the theories about pre-Big Bang. What was before Big Bang? Where did it come from? And it only served to convince me that knowing what came before the Big Bang was unknowable. There was no way we could ever be sure. It really came down to a matter of belief and faith in a particular theory. Just like God. So all of a sudden, science had some things in it that required some faith and some unknowns. Well, so does religion. At the same time, I was working on a global warming presentation for the men's club bagel get-togethers. While doing that, I came across a quote by Jonathan Sacks, chief rabbi of the UK. "Science takes things apart to see how they work," he wrote. "Religion puts things together to see what they mean." Well, that made a lot of sense to me, and it all clicked. Science and religion serve different purposes and could coexist. And I came up with my own version of that saying, of Rabbi Sacks' saying. Science tries to tell us how the universe works, while religion tries to tell us how to live in it. Both versions remind us that science and religion don't have to be at odds. That there are some of us who won't accept the science findings that contradict religious beliefs, and there will be disputes when the boundaries met. When the boundaries meet. But for the most part, science and religion can coexist, one guiding us through the physical world while the other providing us guidance on how we should live in it. I believe that for most of us, this view of their peaceful coexistence lets us reconcile both views of the universe. For example, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. As a kid, I had a vision of an old man with a long beard and a quill pen opening the book of life on Rosh Hashanah and closing it on Yom Kippur. Now I see it differently. This period from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur is a time for a much deeper level of introspection than expected in the secular January New Year's resolutions where you're thinking about things like losing 10 or 20 pounds. Instead, during the high holy days, when I look back at the past year and decide whether I live up to my expectations, it's more about being a moral person, guided in part by my Jewish teachings. Jewish liturgy tells us that God can forgive us for sins against God, but for sins against people, we must seek their forgiveness. I have to think about the others I may have affected or harmed. And guess what? Often that chain of thought leads me to climate change. You didn't think I was going to leave that out, did you? It's a good example, actually, it could be a good example of science and religion working together towards the same goal. Science provides us the facts about what is happening physically to the world in response to our actions and what is likely to happen if we don't mend our ways. It also provides physical solutions. Science also reminds us that the laws of physics are immutable in the sense that they respond to our actions without any concerns for our feelings, our economics, or our profit. Ignore them at your own risk. But often we find ourselves bogged down in the arguments about the economics of climate change, and we end up doing nothing, nero fiddling while Rome burns. This is where religion supplies us with a moral response. Just about every major religion reminds us that we owe a responsibility to this planet. Without this moral imperative, it's easy to fall into some of the common lexicons like profit is king and greed is good. Religion can serve as our moral conscience and help us guide us through the physical world. In my reading this morning, I changed the ending of that reading that I did. It actually came out of the Sinai prayer book, by the way, for Shabbos. And I used the last 3 lines using Midrash Kolat Rabbah 7:13, in which it tells about Adam, God showing Adam the Garden of Eden and the world. And he says, when I bedazzled you with my every wonder, my being create, I would then charge you with its protection. For if you corrupt it or destroy it, there is no one to repair it for you. And that doesn't knock it off. Who knew there was an environmentalist 1,500 years ago when this was written? So religion provides us the moral imperative in response to a scientific alarm, a 5-alarm fire ringing loud and clear. Religion also reminds us that we have a responsibility for preserving this world for our descendants, the dor v'dor. So science and religion are in lockstep, and there's no conflict there. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Hi, Shana Tova. I'm Shira Kleiman. I professionally go by Shira Gabriel because I had a career before I had a family, so I didn't want to have to change my name after having already started publishing. I'm a professor at UB in the psychology department. I'm a social psychologist. So if you aren't familiar with the whole field of psychology, and really why should you be, most people tend to think of psychology in terms of abnormal psychology and clinical psychology and how psychologists help people deal with mental illness, but it's actually a very broad field, and that's only part of it. Most of us who do research in psychology are interested in almost the opposite of abnormal psychology. So we're interested in normal psychology. How do people live their lives on a day-to-day basis, and how can we best understand that? And so that's the kind of stuff that we study. And I am particularly interested in human connection and how people form connections to other people and why that's so important to us and the various ways that we can do that in our lives. And a lot of my research studies non-traditional ways of forming connection to other people. So Mostly when we think about connections, we think about romantic partners and to a smaller degree, friendships and family relationships. But we've been very interested, my students and I, in studying how people can form connections in other ways. And so we study all kinds of things that people do to form connections. So you may feel connected to others when you go online and read similar stories to other people. You may feel connected when you read books or watch television shows. You may feel connected when you eat foods that remind you of the foods that your parents fed you. So we tend to think of human beings as being an ultra-social species, more social even than, like, people say dogs are pack animals, but dogs have nothing on humans. We need other people, and we need to feel connected to other people in order to have well-being and avoid things like anxiety and depression. And so we've been real interested in my lab at how people can do that. And one of the things that we've studied that the rabbi asked me to speak today a little bit about is something that we call collective effervescence. It's not our term. I wish I'd come up with that. But Durkheim, who was a sociologist, came up with that term over 100 years ago to explain religious gatherings and what people experience when they gather with others in community and engage in collective rituals. And Durkheim read reports of these rituals from other parts of the world that he was not familiar with. And these religious rituals, he argued that people engaged in them experienced what he called collective effervescence. And he used that as a blanket term to sort of cover this experience that they had. And Durkheim really argued that religion was incredibly important for societies, that we can't really have societies. It was fascinating in the last talk to think about how religion guides societies in terms of how we should be behaving. And according to Durkheim, we needed that, and we need that as a species. We need religion if we want to live with others, to provide us with that. And he argued that these rituals sort of are one of the engines by which religion can do that it can bring people together. And this isn't something that psychologists have really traditionally studied, which is sort of what happens when people get together in a large group like this. So we're all a bunch of people in a room. Some of you know each other well. Some of you don't know each other at all. There might even be people in here who are here on their own today, who came without any family or friends just to engage with whatever's going on and feel a part of this community. And that's a really, in my mind, special thing that we do as human beings. We do it here in Temple. We get together with other folks and we experience being together in a group. But you may do it in other places too, right? You may go to a concert and you may experience being in community with other folks as you listen to music. You may go to a political rally and you may feel this experience of being connected to other people who are all there for the same cause. You may go watch our Buffalo Bills and feel a connection to all the other folks that are there watching that same thing, or the people on the field. And in a way, these experiences aren't really that logical, right? So during COVID, we did all these things on the computer. We didn't actually get together with one another, and it should have been the same, right? Or maybe even better. So you go to a concert, you can't always hear that well. It's sometimes too loud. There are annoying people next to you. Somebody's pushing on you. You don't really have your space. You paid $300 for your tickets. Like, why do we do that? That seems so illogical as human beings. But we do it because there's something special about being in community with other people. There's something about that fills something very deep within us. And so that was something that really fascinated us in my lab, and we wanted to study it the way that we do, which is from an experimental social psychological lens. So the first thing we did was we thought, well, if this is important to people, we should try and find people who do this a lot and see what are their lives like. And so we developed a scale where we can measure the degree to which people experience collective effervescence. And we just look to see people who have this experience a lot, does it affect their well-being? And it turns out it really does. So above and beyond having your friends and your family and the groups that you belong to, having these experiences of being with other people in the same moment with them predicted well-being in life, a lack of anxiety, less depression, all kinds of positive outcomes. So then we really, as psychologists, wanted to get a feel for like, well then what is this? Like, what's at the heart of this? What do we experience psychologically when we're in these groups and things are going well? We've all had experiences where we're in these groups and it's not that fun. But when you have those magical moments where you're with another group of people and you really feel like, wow, this was a great Shabbat service. This was a wonderful concert. This was a magical football game. Like, what is it? What's happening? And so we ran a lot of research with thousands of people, and we worked with a statistician who specializes in scale construction and examined lots of facets and a whole bunch of boring detail-oriented things that we did. But really, what we discovered was that there are two components. There are two things that happen to us when we gather like this. And one is a sense of connection to other people, and the second is a sense of transcendence. So a feeling that something special is happening, what Durkheim would call elevating the profane to the sacred. So taking just an ordinary moment in life and making it somehow special. And those two things intertwine, that feeling that we're connected and we're all part of something together, and that feeling that something special is happening. When those two things come together and we're with other people, then we find that these events have tremendous weight in our lives. They increase our sense of well-being. They increase our sense of connection. They make us feel joy. They relieve our anxiety. And not just right in the moment, but this lasts for a while. These events stay with us and they last and give us that feeling for longer. So once we had sort of identified the components and done scaling and all kinds of fun things that experimental psychologists do, we really wanted to get a feel for what are the key components of the experience. And one of the first things that we found is music. So music tends to be a really important part of these events. Some of these events are musical, right? So we've all had the experience of going and, you know, hearing the Philharmonic just play so beautifully and everyone just being there in that moment and how special that feels. But we've also had the experience of going to things that aren't musical. So we come to temple not because of the music, although the music's amazing, but we come to temple for other reasons, but there's always music, right? There's always singing. We always raise our voices together. And even something like a football game, you would think, well, there's nothing there, but if I did a little shout singing at all of you, I would hear back about the Buffalo Bills. I won't do it because my voice is nothing that should be shared in the sanctuary right now. But all of these things involve music, so there's something really special about music and its ability to do this. And so we have a grant from the John Templeton Foundation, a foundation that's really interested in the intersection of science and religion, to examine what happens when people raise their voices in song together. And the rabbi has been super helpful in this work for me, both in connecting me to other leaders from all different faiths and providing feedback on the project itself and promises of more feedback later on. And one of the things we're doing with this project is we're going to bring in the Israeli group Kululam. I don't know if anyone has ever heard of Kululam, but they're a group based in Israel, and they do mass singing events. So they bring together hundreds or sometimes thousands or maybe even just dozens of people from different groups, and they teach them a song together in 3-part harmony. It takes about an hour. And then they sing it together and they videotape the whole thing and just create this magical event. There's a lovely video some of you may have seen where they did a Matisyahu song in Haifa, and they had Jews and Arabs and Christians come together and sing it. They've done a lot of these really wonderful things. And we're gonna bring them to Buffalo in March, and I hope many of you will be willing to be involved and come. We've gotten a promise of I'll have like a code for you to get discounted tickets to come, and we'd really like the temple to be there. And it's important to me both as a scientist because it's a wonderful opportunity to be able to study one of these events in person. But it's also just a wonderful thing as a community member, and I think like for me, I've done a lot of research on different things on television and comfort food and celebrities and friendship and how all these things affect our well-being and give meaning to our life. But as a Jew, this particular project has been really exciting to me because I think in my religious experience, there's nothing so wonderful as being here and our welcoming congregation and feeling the welcome of other people. I love how, the rabbi has incorporated us turning to one another and welcoming people and the singing together. I think that for the first time in my career, I've been able to study something that feels very central to my spiritual life as well, and to what I value and to what I get from all of you. And so that's been just personally a really cool part of it. So thank you for listening. That's a little bit about what I study and how I do it, and this little bit that sort of ties it back. And I will come back to the temple with more information as we get closer to March, and we have more details on that event. Thank you. I brought my phone up just to keep track of time because I'm a professor, so if you just give me a microphone and an audience, I'll talk for hours. Everyone will be like passing out from hunger, and I'll still be talking, so. Yeah.
Will you let the rabbi sing in that?
Of course.
Because there's a lot of
No solos. Alan, take over that. Thank you.
So, good Yontif, everyone. My name is Alan Friedman. It's been a long time since I've been here, I think since before the pandemic. So it's very exciting to be back, and I thank the rabbi for pushing me and asking me to come in. We live downtown, so it's a little bit of a schlep for us to get out here, and the pandemic made it kind of very difficult to overcome. But I wrote down some thoughts. I'm going to sort of go through them, but I'm not going to read them because I don't know why I wrote them. I never do this. I usually just talk, and those two talks were wonderful and spontaneous. So I'll try and do the same thing. I'm not a scientist. I'm a greeting card publisher, those of you who might know me. But I have an avocation in astronomy, which is a pretty serious avocation. I've been doing it for 30 or some odd years. And I just did some thinking about the relationship between spirituality that I experience under the night sky and the daytime sky versus the spirituality that I've always enjoyed as a Jew. I heard this, I saw this post on Facebook, I think it was yesterday. It just hit me as preparing to come and talk a little bit. It was, everything happens for a reason, usually physics. And as you can imagine with a Facebook post, and this was an astronomy friend in an astronomy Facebook community, and it was filled with opinions and no, it's mathematics, no, it's biology, and there was some talk about which is primary. Do apples fall from trees because of physics, or do they fall from trees because the apples the apple trees push them down to sow their seeds so that they can make more of themselves. So, but it's a good thought. But it does, I think, point to the complexity of us embracing our religious traditions amidst our understanding of science and the natural world, and the imperatives pointed to us by science and the issues in our natural world. I grew up in New York City. My Jewish tradition is conservative, deeply felt, rooted in my childhood. I always loved to sing, and the melodies and the minor keys, the food, the smells. I like to cook too. The debates, the attitude. It's something that is in my system, and we all. I think everyone can relate to how strongly that guides us. But I have to say that I loved my conservative, which was very recently removed from Orthodox background, because it taught me all the music and all the singing, and it taught me Hebrew, but it didn't really teach me the language. So I could chant these things and not have to really know what they meant, which was very helpful in me kind of fully embracing Judaism in a way that, had I been reading it in English, I might have had more trouble early on, I think. Albert Einstein, you'll have to look him up, Carl Sagan also, to see what their thoughts are about religion. Einstein wrote a lot about it. I pulled out this one little quote which said, "I am not an atheist. I believe in a God," he said, Spinoza's God, "who reveals himself in the orderly harmony of what exists, not in a God who concerns himself with the fate and actions of human beings." And I think many of us probably come to that sense of spirituality where the order of the universe, the way things work, there are some we begin to understand, some are beyond our understanding. They're fascinating and amazing. The idea of a giant white man who listens to our prayers and is there to kind of, give us strength when we just don't know what's going on is a little harder to get behind. So my knowledge of math and science comes from my childhood. I didn't go to Brooklyn Tech, I went to Stuyvesant, which is what Jewish young men did in the 1960s and early 70s. 1960s is when I went. I went to school with a lot of really talented, smart, science and math inclined young people. I went to, my class was David Axelrod. The year before me was Eric Holder. You know, Stuyvesant had all sorts of brilliant people whose names we wouldn't remember who went immediately from Stuyvesant to work at graduate schools around the country. I mean, they were smart. And I learned early on that I did not have what it took to compete at that level. So I followed a tradition which was my dad's and some uncles before me, and I became an artist. I went to UB, it was the only school I applied to, and I was a fine art major there. I met my wife, Donna, that year. We're together 50 years this year, if you can believe that. We started a business making greeting cards. We were printmakers at the university, and we started a line of hand silkscreen greeting cards, which we've been doing for 40 years. Donna was also a costume designer and ran the costume shop at the University of Buffalo. But she started this business with me, and we've pumped about 50 million handmade greeting cards into the world, which people use to express their feelings and say things sometimes that are hard to say. And it's been a good working life. But sometime when my kids were little, I walked out into the street. We were living on a bus route then, West Delavan in this downtown. We still live downtown a couple of blocks away. And a guy had a telescope out on the street. And it was a handmade telescope, large. You had to climb up on a ladder to look through it, which I did. It was pointed toward a bright star. And I got up to the eyepiece, and that star was Saturn. And I got to look at Saturn and see the rings and see something. I don't know how many of you have seen Saturn through a telescope, but the first comment, I've spent years showing people Saturn through a telescope since, and the first comment is always, "That's not real." You take it to Buffalo inner city schools, and it's like, "That's not real. That's painted on there," and it is what it looks like. You've seen pictures of it, and it looks like the pictures, and the star is transformed to an understanding of space and size and time in a moment, and it's so profoundly illuminating and moving. When I've spoken in years since, and I talk to amateur astronomers, a view of Saturn through a telescope is almost always what brought them to this. In 1993, comet Shoemaker-Levy was discovered by 3 amateurs, and then it was shortly plotted its orbit, and it was realized that this comet was going to plow into Jupiter in the coming year. And that convinced me that I had to get a telescope and be able to see this stuff. So I got a small telescope. I took it out in the middle of the night when nobody needed me for anything. It was the only time of the day that I was not needed for anything. And I observed the planets, which you can observe beautifully from downtown Buffalo. The bright sky does not bother the bright planets at all. Unfortunately, the planets are high in the sky in the winter in Buffalo, which is not ideal. I did take a lot of pictures of them early on, but then my bones started getting cold, and I got involved in looking at the sun, which is a great thing because schools are open in the daytime, and you can bring your telescope to school and share views of the sun with students, and it works even better. And I've spent the last, I guess, 25 years or so photographing the sun at solar maximum when it's doing all kinds of amazing flares and beautiful structures, and solar minimum when we can go for 2 years without a sunspot. And you just see this incredible harmony of nuclear fusion with nothing showing on the surface. And it's just a giant balanced ball of light. So this has been my passion for quite some time, and I would say that what I started to do more as time went on was to share this with the public. I have an honorary research position at the Museum of Science, which along with 25 cents will get you on the Staten Island Ferry, or at least it would when we were kids. I think the Staten Island Ferry is free now. But it allows me to be a part of the rebuilding of their observatory and sharing views of the sky from that wonderful rooftop in the museum. And I do it at the kids' schools, I do it on the sidewalks in the city, and it is a way to engage in intensely spiritual bringing to people I don't know. And it's provocative and beautiful, and it's been very valuable to me. So everything happens for a reason, mostly physics. And one of the best explanations of that, the beautiful view of solar mechanics, happens during a total solar eclipse. I'm sure all of you know that there will be an eclipse in Buffalo on April 8th, 3:18 in the afternoon, 2024. Donna and I went to Kentucky to see our first solar eclipse in 2017. And I could give a whole talk about what that was like, which I won't do, but it is just a mind-blowing experience, something not to be missed in life if you can at all accommodate it. This spectacle is going to be amazing on a number of different levels. I mean, the path of totality of a solar eclipse is about 115 miles, which in the 25,000 mile circumference of the sun is a pretty special place to be. Not only are we in the path of totality, but Buffalo is smack dab in the middle of the path of totality. The path of the line of the path of totality passes over Tift Nature Preserve, the northern boundary of it. But the city of Buffalo is going to get almost 4 minutes of totality. We had 2.5 minutes, 2 minutes and 15 seconds, I think, in Kentucky. So it's a long time. It's going to be amazing. And odds makers give us about a 1 in 4 chance of being able to have a clear afternoon in April in Buffalo. So with that, let us pray.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, everyone. We have about 10 minutes if anyone has any questions for any of our speakers. We'll have to clear the room for the family service at about 10 to 3. We have about 10 minutes now. If anyone has any questions they'd like to ask.
You could probably just stand in your seats.
Yeah, there's no reason to come up on stage. Adrian?
I have a question for the social psychologist. Sorry, forgot your first chair.
Sure.
Sharon. So where is she? Okay. So I know you study how people react in groups and how it makes them feel. And this may be a little bit negative, but sometimes when people are in groups and some people get excited or agitated and start doing things they shouldn't be doing, that can affect other people who would otherwise not be behaving badly. You have like mob mentality, what they used to call that. Do you study any of that as well?
Yeah, so it's interesting because that has been what social psychologists have focused on for all of our history as a field in terms of what happens in crowds. Is exactly what you're talking about, mob mentality and de-individuation, where you no longer feel like an individual, but like an interchangeable member of the group, and that can open the door Yeah, so a mob mentality would be a time where people feel what we would refer to as de-individuation. And so normally I wouldn't break, windows on something. And probably, I'm using that as an example, but we see this happen other times. But the people who went to January 6th, if we watch their trials now, it's, he was great, he wouldn't do this in his life, and he never behaved this way. But there's a moment where you stop thinking about yourself as
Well, you know, Bethlehem now, Shir Shalom was really a home, you know, like we welcomed them to Buffalo. I mean, they moved here 18 years ago. And
That's what it was.
that was really part of their whole, you know, acclimation to Buffalo. So we're really grateful for that. Yeah. After my father got sick, they became a little bit more like withdrawn. And my mother relied on like Rabbi Alex and Judy visiting at Amberley, and she would go to things there. But you know, those years were really great for them when they came here to Buffalo.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Glad you had that